1,000 women, a palace filled with whispers and secret alliances, and a pagan altar hidden behind forbidden curtains. At first glance, these seem like unrelated elements, but together they form the riddle that exposes the darkest side of Solomon's life. Rumor had it that he spent nights with several of his wives, while one special favorite led him to cross every boundary, even the boundaries set by God himself. How did the wisest man in the world become lost in a maze of lust, power, and seduction? And what did the Most High do when the world Solomon built began to collapse? Solomon was the son of David, the most beloved king of Israel, and Bathsheba, a woman whose name carried the weight of a turbulent past, full of scandal and tragedy. Her story is so remarkable that we've already told it here on the channel. But now the focus is Solomon, the man chosen by God to inherit his father's throne. He received a solid kingdom, united and feared by its neighbors, but he also inherited an enormous burden, ruling the chosen people. He was not a warrior like David. He was a visionary, a man of ideas, strategy, and ambition, leading Israel into a new golden age, perhaps the greatest in its entire history. One night, as the silence of dawn wrapped around the palace, Solomon had a dream. But not an ordinary dream, the kind that dissolves upon waking. It was a divine vision. God himself appeared before him and said, "Ask whatever you wish, and I will give it to you." Now imagine yourself in that position. What would you ask for? Unlimited wealth, military power, the downfall of your enemies? Solomon asked for something unexpected. "Give me wisdom to govern this great people." His request surprised even the heavens. He could have asked for power, glory, or vengeance. Instead, he asked for understanding. God was so pleased with his humility that he gave Solomon not only wisdom, but also riches and honor, like no king before him. His wisdom soon became legendary. You've surely heard about the judgment involving two women who fought over a baby. No witnesses, no proof, no solution. Solomon called for a sword and ordered the child to be cut in half, a calculated move. The true mother, desperate, begged that the baby be given to the other woman so he would live. In that instant, Solomon declared, "She is the true mother." That moment placed him on the map of the ancient world. Kings and queens from distant lands heard his name. Ambassadors crossed deserts seeking his counsel. Solomon wrote proverbs, composed songs, and his wisdom was compared to that of heavenly messengers. Israel prospered like never before. He built the temple of the Lord, a magnificent structure filled with gold, precious stones, and luxurious cedar, the pride of an entire nation. But as Solomon built temples and accumulated gold, he began collecting something far more dangerous. Women in the ancient world. Marrying foreign princesses meant political alliances, treaties, and influence. But for Solomon, politics turned into indulgence. His harem grew like a kingdom within the palace itself. Moabite, Ammonite, Sidonian, Hittite, and Egyptian women, each bringing their traditions, languages, customs, and above all, their gods. The Bible states that Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines, 1,000 women, 1,000 stories, 1,000 connections. Many never even spoke with the king. Some waited months for a single encounter. Others, the favorites, were adorned with rare jewels, surrounded by servants, and competed fiercely for attention, as if the harem itself were a throne within the throne. And when jealousy appeared, when ambitions collided, the harem became a silent arena of intrigue, rivalry, and constant manipulation. Each woman wanted to be the favorite, the most desired, the one who would draw the king's gaze from among a crowd of faces, fragrances, and whispers. And there stood Solomon, at the very center of this whirlwind of vanity and ambition, sinking deeper and deeper into his own lust. Nights in the palace turned into endless celebrations. Musicians played until dawn, threatened the sky, tables bent under the weight of exotic foods, and dancers competed for the monarch's attention, each believing she could become the one woman to capture the heart of the most powerful king on earth. But beauty wasn't all they brought. Each foreign princess carried her myths, her temples, her rituals, and her gods. And little by little, like drops of water carving stone, this began to shape Solomon's heart. The king who built the temple of the Lord, the man who spent years and fortunes to honor the God of Israel, began raising other altars, hidden altars built on quiet hillsides to please his wives. He knew God's command, he knew the consequences. But desire, for their approval, for their affection, spoke louder than his devotion. The harem, once a symbol of power, became the beginning of his downfall. God had given Solomon wisdom, prosperity, and unmatched honor, but the king allowed himself to be ruled by the same desire that destroyed many rulers before him, and the price, inevitably, would be devastating. For many rulers, gold and authority would have been enough. For Solomon, they weren't. His passion for women became a reflection of his hunger for control, influence, and pleasure. In the beginning, his marriages could be justified as diplomatic alliances, but over time, they turned into something far darker. A colossal harem of 1,000 women wasn't merely a display of affection, it was a living gallery of power. Every new wife symbolized a political victory, a carefully woven pact between distant kingdoms. When Solomon took Pharaoh's daughter as his own, he achieved a historic milestone. No king of Israel had ever come so close to the might of Egypt, but the alliances that began as strategy soon became a personal collection. For him, women became trophies. Every new face fed his vanity. Every conquest inflated his sense of absolute dominion. The palace itself reflected this transformation. Imagine entire corridors reserved exclusively for the king's women. The highest-ranking princesses and wives occupied the most luxurious wings, filled with tapestries, ivory, and imported incense. The concubines, however, lived in smaller quarters, surviving on the fragile, often illusionary, hope of being summoned by the king even once. And Solomon, surrounded by this universe of seduction and authority, moved among them with the cold detachment of someone selecting rare jewels to display. But lust is insatiable. The more he sought pleasure, the emptier he became. The craving for something new, a different face, a new culture, a perfume he had not yet breathed, consumed him completely. He began bringing in women not only from allied nations, but even from peoples who had once been enemies of Israel. Women who did not worship the living God, but foreign deities, forbidden cults, and rituals that violated the law of the Lord. And that was when something inside him began to crumble. The heart that had once belonged solely to the God of Israel started to fracture. To satisfy some of his favorite wives, Solomon permitted them to perform pagan rituals. At first, they were small concessions, a bit of incense burned here, a ritual gesture there. Then the king himself ordered the construction of pagan altars in the land. Hills once pure began to host temples to foreign gods, while the temple of the Lord still gleamed at the center of Jerusalem. These decisions did not go unnoticed. Priests murmured in the sacred halls. Elders whispered among themselves. And the people, who once saw Solomon as the wisest man on earth, began to ask in quiet voices, sometimes in loud ones, whether their king still followed the God of Israel. But Solomon no longer heard anything. He was completely overtaken by obsession, blinded by the power his alliances gave him and the pleasure that flowed freely through banquets, perfumes, and seductions. Yet something deeper gnawed at his soul. For all the women and glory he collected, a silent emptiness grew within him. It was like a thirst that could never be quenched. Neither gold, nor music, nor caresses could fill the void. And slowly, the wisest king in the world began to learn a bitter lesson, one many discover far too late. When we place our own desires above God, we never find true satisfaction. But Solomon had not yet reached the bottom of this abyss. The harem continued to expand like an empire within an empire, and rivalries among the women were only beginning to boil. The king, who once stood as the symbol of wisdom and justice, was becoming a prisoner of his own heart, bound by invisible chains forged from seduction, vanity, and pride. And then something happened that changed everything. Among the 700 wives and 300 concubines, there was one who stood out. She was not just another shadow in the palace corridors. This woman achieved what none of the others ever had. She captured Solomon's heart so deeply that he began making decisions powerful enough to shake the entire kingdom. The Bible does not record her name, but her influence is felt between the lines. We may imagine her as a striking figure, perhaps hypnotically beautiful, perhaps brilliantly intelligent, perhaps wrapped in a foreign mystery that the king found impossible to resist. She was not merely a wife. She was the favorite. Solomon spent more time with her than with any other woman. The finest gifts were reserved for her. The most exquisite garments were brought from distant lands to adorn her before her. The king seemed willing to move mountains. And it was precisely this blind devotion that ignited the spark of an even greater downfall. This woman belonged to a people who worshipped other gods. From the very beginning, she showed deep devotion to the deities of her homeland. At first, she merely asked for permission to perform small rituals in secret, and Solomon, completely captivated, allowed it. But it wasn't enough. She wanted more. She wanted an altar, a sacred space dedicated to her gods, a bold request forbidden by the law, and one that directly defied everything the Lord had commanded. Solomon knew this. He knew that building an altar to another deity was a grave spiritual betrayal, especially coming from the very man who had built the temple of God himself. Yet even so, he gave in, all to please her. He ordered the construction of the altar. To the people, it might have seemed like a simple concession from an infatuated husband, but in reality, it marked the beginning of his spiritual downfall, and then the door swung wide open. When the other wives saw the privilege granted to the favorite, they began demanding altars for their own gods, and Solomon, entangled in his desire to maintain peace and control within the harem, continued yielding. One altar became two became five became entire hills covered with pagan temples. The priests of the temple were horrified. The people murmured in disbelief. How could the same king who dedicated his life to building a majestic house for the Lord allow foreign deities to be honored in the land of Israel? And it didn't stop there. Solomon not only allowed it, he participated. To please his favorite wife, he offered incense and gifts at some of those altars. His feet, which once stepped reverently into the courts of the temple, now climbed pagan hills under the cover of night. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the harem erupted with jealousy. The women watched everything, every new necklace, every rare dress, every extra night spent with the king. And so the intrigues were born. Some plotted against the favorite, seeking to diminish her, expose her, or even remove her from the picture entirely. The harem, once a place of subtle competition, became an emotional battlefield filled with internal alliances, gossip, poison, and false smiles. And Solomon, trapped in his passion, he saw none of it. Or perhaps he did. But he no longer had the strength to confront what he himself had allowed to grow. The wisdom that once guided Solomon, the same wisdom that impressed kings, priests, and nations, now seemed veiled by a thick fog. The light that once led him through the hardest decisions had dimmed, smothered by a dangerous mixture of lust, pride, and the desperate need to please the woman who had captured his heart. Solomon had become a divided man. One part still remembered the God who exalted him. The other burned with desire for the women who surrounded him. And the more he tried to reconcile the two worlds, the more lost he became. But God was not unaware of what was happening. The Lord, who had given Solomon wisdom, power, and wealth beyond measure, began sending signs, clear warnings, though silent, and those warnings would soon turn into real consequences. What Solomon did not realize was that by placing his desire to please a woman above the will of God, he was opening deep cracks in everything he had built. His glory, his kingdom, and even his lineage were now at risk. Inside the luxurious palace, something dark was taking shape. The harem, once a reflection of the king's power and greatness, had become a labyrinth of rivalries, intrigues, and sensual practices that ran directly against the commandments of the Lord. What happened behind the palace's ornate doors was as intense as it was destructive. The nights in the palace were a spectacle of excess. Music echoed through marble corridors, dancers moved with seductive grace, and tables overflowing with exquisite dishes were replenished before the feast even ended. For the harem, this was routine. Each wife and concubine did everything in her power to stand out. Dresses adorned with precious stones, fabrics imported from distant lands, perfumes so potent they seemed to have a will of their own. The atmosphere was pure excess, where lust ruled without resistance. Solomon, often surrounded by several women at once, took part in these celebrations as if the world consisted solely of that universe of pleasure and dance. For some of them, it was their only chance to catch his gaze. For him, it was yet another opportunity to surrender to the desire that consumed him like fire. But this constant pursuit of pleasure came with a price. The intrigues reached an alarming level. Wives conspired against each other, concubines tried to manipulate circumstances to rise in rank, and the favorites did everything in their power to maintain their supremacy. Jealousy was palpable. Envy drifted through the corridors like a cold wind. Betrayals became common, and tension spread like a plague. Meanwhile, the pagan rituals brought by the foreign wives became increasingly obvious. On certain nights, strange chants echoed through the inner gardens. On others, servants could be seen carrying offerings to hidden altars within the harem's quarters. Solomon knew, of course he knew, but he chose to ignore it. Instead of stopping them, he turned a blind eye. Instead of correcting them, he let himself be carried away. In the private chambers, sensual pleasures had become the center of the king's life. Practices considered abominable by the law of God were now routine, and to Solomon, all of it became increasingly fascinating. The man who once placed wisdom above all else now surrendered to the pull of his most carnal impulses. His closest advisors began to notice the change. The king, who had been wise, calculated, and strategic, now seemed distant, distracted, as if he lived in a world of his own. Major decisions for the kingdom were delayed or treated carelessly. Religious leaders were no longer summoned to the palace, as frequently spiritual matters seemed irrelevant compared to the king's new lifestyle. And the people of Israel soon felt the effects of this decline. Idolatry, which had once hidden behind palace walls, began to spread throughout the land. Altars dedicated to foreign gods appeared on hills, plazas, and even along trade routes. The practices imported through the harem were contaminating the faith of the people like a disease multiplying in silence. The palace that was supposed to be the ultimate symbol of glory, justice, and the presence of God was now becoming a place of shadows. Solomon, surrounded by luxury, fragrances, and women on every side, walked further and further away from God, without even realizing it. What once seemed like a symbol of strength and greatness had become a golden prison. The harem that dazzled visiting dignitaries was, in reality, the chain binding the wisest king on earth. He was trading everything God had given him, glory, wisdom, honor, and peace, for pleasures that lasted only moments. But God had not given up on him. The Lord had not abandoned him to his own error. On the contrary, he was about to confront Solomon directly, and undeniably the warning came as clear as fire. God sent a prophet with a harsh message. Because of Solomon's idolatry and disobedience, the kingdom would be torn apart after his death. His lineage would keep only a portion of it, and that only for the sake of David, the faithful servant who had walked before God with a whole heart. It was a devastating blow. The king, whose fame had crossed deserts, seas, and mountains, now knew his legacy was doomed. For a moment, Solomon tried to regain control. He tried to re-establish order, silence criticism, restore the image of a king who still ruled with strength. But it was too late. His heart was divided, and the intimate connection he once had with God was now distant like an echo. And the most painful part was that he knew. He knew he had traded his faith for fleeting pleasures. and now his people were paying the price. Even so, there was still one final lesson to learn, and that lesson would come at the darkest moment of his life. In his final days, Solomon lived surrounded by silence. The enormous palace that once vibrated with music, dance, and laughter was now drowned in emptiness. The festivities ceased. The corridors once filled with voices now stood quiet. The wives who had once fought fiercely for his attention were distant, some isolated, others devoted to the pagan gods they had brought with them. The man who once ruled Israel with unmatched wisdom now faced the bitterest loneliness. He looked toward the temple he had built with such effort, yet knew that all its brilliance could not cover the darkness he had allowed to enter Israel. And then God confronted him once and for all. The Lord who had given him wisdom in his youth now stood before him as judge. The divine voice seemed to echo within his very soul. "You have disobeyed my commands. You built altars to other gods and turned away from me. For this, the kingdom will be taken from your hands." But for the sake of David, God would not destroy everything. A portion of the kingdom would remain with Solomon's lineage. It was mercy, but it was also a reminder of the weight of sin. Those words pierced Solomon like a sword. He finally understood that, despite all the wealth, all the women, and all the power, he was empty. He realized he had despised the greatest of all gifts, fellowship with the Creator himself. With trembling hands and a heavy heart, Solomon wrote words that were more than an outcry. They were a cry of repentance. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. It was the late confession of a king who at last understood that every form of power and pleasure he had pursued was nothing but dust without God. But Solomon's repentance was not enough to save the kingdom. After his death, the northern tribes rebelled under Jeroboam, fulfilling exactly what God had prophesied. Rehoboam, his son, became king in Judah, but he was weak, unable to maintain the unity built by David and Solomon. Israel was divided. The hills still held the pagan altars Solomon himself had ordered, and idolatry stained the land like a lingering shadow. The people were lost, trapped between foreign gods and the true God, and Solomon's legacy became a painful blend of glory and tragedy. The man who began his life as the most wise and devoted of kings ended as a solitary figure, aged and consumed by guilt. His story echoed as a solemn warning to all who, like him, allow their desires to silence the voice of God. As the kingdom shattered after his death, Solomon's memory was recalled with sorrow. He had been a great king, yes, but his fall was even greater. His pursuit of pleasure drove him away from God, and his wisdom, in the end, was not enough to save him from the consequences of his own actions. And perhaps in the final silence of his last moments, Solomon realized the bitterest truth of all. He was the architect of his own destruction. Thank you for watching until the end. May God bless you, and I'll see you soon.